There's a kind of wrong you never question. Not the obvious kind, doing something you know is off, or drifting away from what you believe. Not that. This is quieter. Everything still looks fine while you're in it. You're doing a lot of things right. You hold on to your faith. From the outside, nothing seems out of place. That's what makes it dangerous. I've been there. Nothing was falling apart. No warning signs, just a quiet sense that everything was okay. And that was the problem. It never forced me to stop. Never made me step back and ask if anything was off. It's like a relationship. Someone can stay, show up, do what they're supposed to do. Everything looks intact, until one day the other person says, "We've never really known each other." Not because there was no effort, not because they were absent, but because they were never truly in it the way they thought they were. There's a statement from Jesus Christ, and taken seriously, it's not easy to sit with. It's not aimed at people who oppose him, not directed at those who walked away. It's spoken to people who say, "Lord, Lord," people who are convinced they know him, people who believe they're on the right path. And then they hear something no one expects. "I never knew you." What makes that unsettling isn't that they were wrong. It's that nothing in their life told them they were. No signs, no warnings. Everything looked right, until it wasn't. Part 1. They were sure they were right. There's something difficult to admit. The people who hear those words don't see it coming. They're not walking around thinking they're wrong. They're not resisting God. They're not trying to live against what they believe. It's the opposite. They call him Lord. Not once, not casually. It's familiar, natural. The way someone speaks when they're sure they belong. They're not standing outside looking in. They believe they've been inside for a long time. There's a kind of confidence that doesn't feel dangerous. It's quiet. You go through your days doing what you believe is right. Nothing feels off. Nothing in you says stop. Everything just continues. It's like climbing a ladder. You put in the effort. You don't quit. You keep moving. Every step makes sense. Every day looks like progress. Only one thing is wrong. The ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. From the ground, no one sees a problem. If anything, people might say, "You're doing well." And that's what makes it harder to notice. There's nothing pulling you back. Nothing forcing you to question it. The people in the words of Jesus Christ are like that. They don't come empty-handed. They have something to point to. Something that looks convincing from the outside. But the issue isn't what they have. It's what they trust. They believe what they have is enough. That's where things begin to shift. Not when they start doing something wrong, but when they stop examining what they already believe is right. A certainty that never gets questioned, a sense of peace that never gets tested, a path that never gets looked at twice. And then it ends, not because they stopped, but because they reached the end of where that path leads. And there, those words aren't a warning. They're a conclusion. Part 2, they had proof, just not the right kind. They didn't come empty. They had something to point to. Not a feeling, not a vague hope that things might work out. Something concrete. In Matthew 7:22, they say it plainly. "Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?'" There's no hesitation in that sentence. They're not unsure. They're not asking quietly. They're standing there, pointing to what they've done. As if to say, "Look at this has to count." That kind of confidence doesn't come from nowhere. It builds slowly. You do something right. Then another thing. Then another. Over time, those things start to stack up. And without realizing it, you begin to trust the stack. You don't say it out loud. You don't even think about it directly. But it's there. A quiet conclusion forming underneath everything. This means I'm okay. It's like someone who's been working for years. They chose a path early on. They stayed disciplined. They didn't quit when it got hard. From the outside, it looks like a life with direction. There's structure. There's effort. There's consistency. Nothing about it looks wrong. And then one day, something feels off. Not because anything collapsed. Not because everything failed. But because after all that time, they stop and realize this isn't where they wanted to end up. The work was real. The effort was real, but it led somewhere they never stopped to question. Or think about someone who's been in church for a long time. They know how things work. They know the language. They know what sounds right. If you listen to them, there's nothing obviously wrong. Everything lines up. But there's a moment, usually quiet, usually alone, where something doesn't connect. Not visibly, not dramatically. Just a gap between everything they know and something they've never actually faced. That's the kind of proof this is. Not fake, not meaningless, just pointing in the wrong direction. Because once something starts to feel like proof, you stop examining it. You stop asking what it actually means. You stop asking whether it's leading you where you think it is. And that's where things shift. Not when someone turns away. Not when someone starts doing the wrong thing. But when they keep doing what looks right and never stop to ask if it's enough. The people in that moment in Matthew 7 aren't empty. They're holding on to everything they believe should speak for them. And that's exactly what makes it so difficult to see. Because nothing in their life told them to doubt it. Everything they had made sense. It just didn't mean what they thought it meant. Part 3, I never knew you, means something different than you think. Those words don't mean what most people assume. I never knew you doesn't mean I don't recognize you. It doesn't mean I've never heard of you. It doesn't mean they were strangers in the usual sense, because clearly they weren't. They spoke to him. They acted in his name. Their lives were shaped around something connected to him. There was familiarity in the way they said, Lord, Lord. That kind of language doesn't come from distance. It comes from proximity, at least on the surface. So the problem isn't that they were far away. It's that what they thought was a relationship wasn't one. We use the word know very loosely. You can know a lot about someone. You can follow what they say, repeat what they've taught, build your life around ideas connected to them, and still not know them. Not in the way that matters. Think about how easy it is now to feel like you know someone you've never met. You watch them, listen to them, learn their patterns. You can predict what they'll say before they say it. You become familiar with their voice, their tone, their perspective. After a while, it feels personal. But it isn't. There's no exchange, no real connection, nothing that goes both ways. That gap is easy to ignore because everything on the surface feels close. And that's exactly where the confusion lives. In Matthew 7:23, the sentence continues, Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. There's a finality to that. Not anger first, not explanation first, just clarity. I never knew you. That's not about information. It's about relationship. Not what they did, not what they said, not what they believed they had proven, but whether there was anything real between them and him. And that's where everything shifts. Because it's possible to build a life around God and never actually be with him. It's possible to stay close to everything that looks right and still miss the one thing that makes it real. That's what makes those words so heavy. Not because they're harsh, but because they leave no space to argue, no space to point back at what you've done, no space to explain, just a line that separates what looked real from what actually was. Part 4. What an outward faith actually looks like. This is where it gets uncomfortable, because nothing about it looks obviously wrong. An outward faith doesn't look fake. It doesn't look empty. It doesn't look like something you would reject. It's a life where everything is still in place. You still believe. You still show up. You still do what you've always done. Nothing collapses. If anything, it becomes more structured, more consistent, more stable. And that's what makes it hard to see. From the outside, there's no reason to question it. But you're not walking away. You're not losing interest. You're not turning your back on anything. Everything still fits. But something underneath stops moving. Not all at once. Not in a way you can point to. It just settles. Like a tree that's still standing, still has leaves, still looks alive, but it's not growing anymore. You wouldn't notice it in a day. Or a week. It takes time before anyone sees the difference. And even then, it's subtle. Because outwardly, nothing is missing. The words are still there. The actions are still there. The rhythm is still there. But there's no depth behind it. It becomes familiar, predictable. You know what to say, but you know how to respond. You know how to stay within the shape of it. And because everything still works, no one questions it. That's the danger. Not that it's false in an obvious way, but that it's convincing. This is why in the same chapter, Matthew 7:16 says, "By their fruit you will recognize them." Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Not by what they say, not by what they appear to be, but by what actually grows over time. Because growth can't be faked. Not real growth. You can repeat the right things. You can stay consistent on the surface. But over time, what's real shows itself. An outward faith can hold everything together for a while. It can look right. It can sound right. It can even feel right. But it doesn't change you. Not deeply, not quietly, not over time. And that's where the difference begins to show. Not in moments, but in direction. One keeps growing. The other stays the same, just more polished. And eventually that difference becomes impossible to hide, not to others first, but to the truth itself. Part 5, it's all saying the same thing. When you step back and look at the whole chapter, you start to notice something. It doesn't move randomly. It's not a collection of separate ideas. It keeps circling the same point, just from different angles, like someone trying to say one thing clearly enough that it can't be missed. First, it talks about judging, how easy it is to see what's wrong in someone else while missing what's right in front of you. Then it moves to the narrow gate, the idea that not everyone ends up where they think they will, even if the road they're on feels familiar and wide and easy to stay on. Then it speaks about false prophets, people who look right on the surface, who say the right things, who can even convince others, and yet something underneath doesn't match. Then it brings up the tree and its fruit, where time reveals what's actually real, not what looks convincing at first glance. And then it lands on that moment, Lord, Lord, where everything comes together. It's not changing topics, it's building toward it. Every part of the chapter is pressing on the same tension, the difference between what looks right and what actually is. Because those two things can stay close for a long time. You can be on a path that feels right, surrounded by people who affirm it, doing things that seem meaningful, and still be moving in the wrong direction without anything forcing you to stop. You can see clearly when something is off in someone else's life and still miss what's off in your own. You can follow something that sounds true and never question where it's leading. You can produce something that looks like fruit and still never ask what it's growing out of. That's why none of these sections stand alone. They all point back to the same reality. It's possible to be convinced without being right. And not in a dramatic way, not in a way that breaks everything all at once. In a way that stays steady, quiet, and consistent enough that you never feel the need to look deeper. That's what ties it all together. Not a list of warnings, but one clear line running through all of it. What appears right on the surface can carry you somewhere completely different underneath. Part 6. Why it's so hard to see. The hardest part about this isn't the idea itself. It's how quiet it is. Nothing forces you to notice it. Nothing interrupts your routine. Life keeps moving, and everything still seems to hold together. You're still doing what you've always done, still thinking the way you've always thought, still moving in the same direction without anything pushing back. And over time, that becomes its own kind of confirmation. Not because you've tested it, not because you've examined it closely, but because nothing has ever made you question it. There's a point where effort becomes identity. You've invested too much time to step back easily, too much energy, too much of yourself. So even if something feels slightly off, you don't stay there long enough to face it. You move past it. You keep going, because stopping would mean rethinking everything that came before. And that's not easy to do. It's like someone who has been walking in the same direction for years. The path feels familiar. The ground feels stable. There's no reason to turn around, because nothing in front of them looks wrong. But the longer they walk, the harder it becomes to imagine going back. Not because they can't, but because they don't want to face the possibility that they've come this far in the wrong direction. That's why this stays hidden. Not because it's complicated, but because it's uncomfortable. It asks something people usually avoid. Not more effort, not more activity, but honesty. And honesty doesn't feel urgent when everything still looks fine. There's no crisis, no visible collapse, no moment that demands attention. So the question never gets asked. The people in Matthew 7:22 didn't lack effort. If anything, they had more than most. They had something to show, something to point to, something that in their mind explained everything. And that's exactly what kept them from seeing it. Because once you believe you have enough, you stop looking for what's missing. You stop checking whether what you have actually leads where you think it does. That's what makes this so difficult to recognize. It doesn't come from weakness. It comes from confidence. Not loud, obvious confidence, but a quiet, settled belief that everything is already where it should be, and that belief can carry you a long way, without ever letting you see where you're actually going. Part 7. When there's nothing left to point to. At some point, everything you've been holding on to goes quiet. No more explanations. No more "but I did this." No more ways to prove anything. Just you. Not in front of people. Not in a place where anything needs to look right. Just you, without anything to point to. That's where this becomes real. Because as long as there's something to show, something to measure, something to lean on, you can stay one step removed from it. You can stay in control. But when all of that falls away, there's nothing left to manage, nothing left to organize, nothing left to perform. It's like standing in front of a mirror and not turning away this time. Not adjusting anything, not fixing the surface, just seeing it as it is. And this is where everything in Matthew 7 turns. Not toward doing more, not toward trying harder, but toward something much simpler and much harder to avoid. In Matthew 7:24 it says, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock." Not someone who heard more, not someone who had more to show, someone who actually built on something real. That's the difference. Not appearance, foundation. Because you can build a structure that looks right from the outside and still have nothing underneath it that can hold, and you won't notice it right away. It can stand for a long time. It can look stable, until it isn't. There comes a point where what's underneath matters more than everything on the surface. Not what you've said, not what you've done, but what your life has actually been built on. And that's not something you can prove. It's something you stand on. There's no performance here, no comparison, no one else to measure against. Just a quiet, clear line between what is real and what only looked like it was. And once you see that, there's nothing else to add. Conclusion. What remains when everything is quiet? There aren't many words left at this point. Not because there's nothing to say, but because anything added now would only get in the way. You've seen the pattern. How something can look right for a long time. How effort can feel like proof. How a life can stay steady and still drift somewhere it was never meant to go. And how none of it makes noise while it's happening. There comes a moment when all of that settles. No more building. No more explaining. No more trying to hold everything together. Just a clear line between what is real and what only looked like it was. And that line doesn't move. It doesn't adjust based on how much was done. It doesn't bend around effort or intention. It simply shows what was there all along. That's why this isn't about doing more. It's not about adding something new on top of everything you've already built. It's about what remains when everything else is stripped away. Because in the end, nothing you point to will matter as much as what you were actually standing on. And if there is grace in all of this, it's here, that this moment doesn't have to come at the end. It can come now, quietly, honestly, before Jesus Christ, not to fix everything, not to prove anything, just to be real with him. May you have the courage to stand there without turning away. May you have the honesty to see what is truly there, not just what has been built on the surface, and may your life be rooted in something deeper than effort, something that holds even when everything else is stripped away. May your faith not rest in what you can point to, but in knowing him and being known by him. Peace be with you.